let me add this stage. Let me let you see my room here. Let's see. All right, I've got to fix an audio issue that I've been. Why? Is that doing that? Talk amongst yourselves. Sorry, testing my speakers there. Man. All right, I'm going to do it this way. Sorry, y'all know how it goes. But I can put this up. Oh, I'm getting so aggravated. Sorry, y'all. Sorry. Yeah, can y'all hear me? I'm hoping. He's been outside playing on his pile of sticks. So he has been happy. All right, let me see. Try this. A little bit of this. A little bit of that. And test. All right. I got sidetracked with some work stuff. Sorry. I didn't prepare properly. Let's see. You want some Sleeping Dog? WWII. Okay, here we go. So I want to start with this. This is from the World War II, the National World War II Museum in Nowlands. As Jeff likes to hear. So we go back to the old quote, right? Not all wounds are visible at first glance. So this is a look into the psychological strain of combat and its long-lasting effects on our nation's warriors. So this was way back in 2020 during and yes, thank you, Nomad, for the wonderful thumbnail from this. So we've already defined many times. My shirt does not do well on the screen, does it? PTSD. So when you face a life and death situation, a chemical reaction occurs that heightens awareness. But when PTSD strikes, the response becomes disordered. Um, so um, the modern military refers to this condition as combat stress reaction, and it is to be expected due to the emotional, mental, and physical demands of prolonged combat operations. I wanted to play the new intro that you sent me. So, as the saying goes, stay alert, stay alive. What's up, Joey? Are you showcasing my forehead there, bud? Oh no. Um, so wise words indeed. But how long can you remain vigilant? How long before this damage becomes permanent? It's difficult to say because the results of long-term exposure to combat varies among individuals. Our chemical reactions are all different. Golly, I am shining off the forehead awful lot. So didn't mean to blind y'all with that. So during World War II, it was determined by the Army that the breaking point for a soldier was 60 to 240 days, depending on the intensity and frequency of the combat. So this condition was nothing new among combat soldiers, but military medicine was gaining a better grasp on and understanding on exactly what was causing it. So, you know, as we've talked about before, nostalgia. I never heard of old sergeant's disease. That was a interesting one, or shell shock. Was now appropriately termed combat fatigue, and um, the though the doctors didn't know it at the time, they were on to something because they were theorizing that a lot of the combat stress was from brain injury, but they just didn't have the technology or really the know-how to um, pinpoint it, much like we do now, and have just like here the Army's calling it a combat stress reaction instead of post-traumatic stress disorder. I still think it shouldn't be a disorder. It shouldn't be a reaction. Um, it should be a disease. It could be post-traumatic stress disease. Um, so the War Department in past wars, um, and in the opening days of World War II, the War Department believed that soldiers suffering from combat fatigue had an underlying pre-existing mental condition. So there was always already something there. They called the soldiers weak. They would say pull yourself up by your bootstraps, etc. So accordingly, inductees were psychologically screened and rejected for service if they were perceived to possess a weak constitution or mental deficiencies that were considered a potential indicator of a breakdown in combat. So, after Guadalcanal, though, the U.S. military learned that a serviceman's ability to survive the psychological rigors of combat could not be predicted. The point was driven home when, in 1943, one of the nation's elite fighting forces suffered significant psychiatric casualties. More than 500 Marines returning from Guadalcanal were treated for symptoms such as tremors, sensitivity to loud noises, and periods of amnesia. The condition was termed Guadalcanal disorder. I mean, they just said it. Let's see, where was it? Let's see. Psychiatric casualties. There it is. Yeah, I agree, Mrs. Mankel. But psychiatric casualties is something that would work in my narrow, educated opinion. So, as more American service members entered into combat, the number of psychological casualties steadily rose. During Normandy, Army psychologists noted that the combat effectiveness of troops sharply declined after 30 days of combat. And we've discussed that. And then after the 45, right, they were in a near vegetative state. Psychiatrist John Apple, we've heard from him before, who studied, maybe a pale, combat exhaustion cases during the Battle of Monte Cassino and the Anzio campaigns, came to the sobering conclusion that practically all men in rifle battalions who are not otherwise disabled ultimately become psychiatric casualties. So, military medicine conceded that it wasn't the question of if a soldier would break in combat, but a question of when. So this is when you get into a 4-star and R and stuff like that. Bringing people back for a couple of years or a year. In theory, I was doing a nice, Joey. They would say, "Oh, you're essential. You need to get to this place and be there on this date." But it is what it is. Anyway, so with a war to be won in a manpower crisis, we saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan during the 20-year war. The military's primary concern was to return men to duty as quickly as possible. This was done by evacuating psychologically traumatized men to aid stations just to the rear of the front lines. There, casualties received a dose of sodium amytal, which put them into a deep sleep for a period of up to 48 hours. Me and Jeff talked about that last night, right? Afterwards, they ate a hot meal, showered, and put on a clean uniform. Then they were evaluated by medical personnel. Most responded positively to the treatment, and 50 to 70% of combat exhaustion cases were returned to combat within 3 days. That I can't imagine the long-term damage that the shock to the system returning back after 3 days would have, though. So hit that like and subscribe if you haven't. During World War II, it is estimated that only 1 million men, or roughly one out of every 16 service members, saw what could be considered sustained combat. I think this was 45 days during World War II. This group, and that's 45 days in a year. When we went to Vietnam, it was more like 230, 40, something like that. It is estimated, this group, however, accounts for the majority of the war's casualties. Even when enemy bullets and shrapnel failed to kill or physically wound, they inflicted casualties nonetheless. More than 500,000 service members suffered some sort of psychiatric collapse due to combat. Alarmingly, 40% of medical discharges during the war were for psychiatric conditions. The vast majority of those can be attributed to combat stress. Or I still like, I hate saying I like the term psychological or psychiatric casualty, but it works. After the war, Americans returning from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific were eager to get on with their lives. One benefit for returning servicemen was an unemployment payment of $20 a week for a year with no stipulation on how the money was spent. Returning servicemen called it the 50-20 Club. Many used the time the program afforded them to relax and process traumatic experiences for more. Roadhog, yeah, I've seen it, and I've seen it denied from that generation as well, right? But you could see it in them. They're the suck it up buttercup crowd. I guess we got another visitor. She's been scarce since Phantom came around. Some of them grew bored of civilian life as it paled in comparison to the overstimulation that only combat provides. I can attest to that. Domestic bliss was never the thing I enjoyed as much as warring, as much as some people like to criticize that. But they claim that they have the same affliction. Oh, wow. Was he like a fire control officer or something, Roadhog? I don't. Those POW camps in Japan were horrible. I mean, all of them were, but the Japanese were brutal in their imperialism. Don't cancel me for that. I'm just stating a historical fact. So for many years, let's see. So PTSD can afflict anyone. It's just going to determine what your breaking point is, right? And if you experience that breaking point, it's gonna hit. And getting into that cycle of overstimulation, going back, gets you away from that mindset, right? Because you have to stay hyper vigilant. So I was that way for a long time, but I had too many doctors tell me that talking about it is a way to numb it. It works to some success. Okay. So, seemingly small, non-life-threatening situations can initiate the same internal chemical reaction that individuals experienced in combat or otherwise terrible past experiences. So, I'm going to skip that because the video we're going to go over covers a lot of this. So, Symptoms manifest in outbursts of anger, rage, insomnia, and bouts with depression that wreak havoc on careers and personal relationships. The results of this behavior undoubtedly diminish the quality of life for people with PTSD and their loved ones. Um, Loved ones definitely suffer from PTSD, and it doesn't have to be because of anger and rage. It can be because of the depression and and the um, the pulling away, the isolation. Um, oh wow, those were cool times when you could bring back war trophies, and I mean, and people like Delta Force guys and SEALs, they all have their war trophies. So I didn't I didn't want any part of it. Now I wish I would have. Let's see. So one of the most here we go. One of the most prevalent symptoms of PTSD is avoidance, not wanting to talk about it. In the decades that followed the war, and to the chagrin of many baby boomers growing up, their parents never spoke about the war. So Roadhog, there you go. Um, it was their generation, and what's up, Mr. Rican? How are you? Been a while. This this was my warfare. No, I know what you're talking about. All right, I'm going to take this down, and I am going to stop screen, share screen, and we're gonna watch this. That's the first time they've lay close to each other. I like this guy. He tells a good story. So I'm gonna let him speak for a minute, and we can talk about this. And away we go.
This war has brought unprecedented levels of destruction and brutality. The hand-to-hand combat and hypothermia at Stalingrad, the desperate offensives of the Japanese against the Marines at Guadalcanal, all accompanied by endless fire from the skies over homes and factories, and the barbarism of the war against humanity. Amid this violence, every man and woman fights an invisible battle in their mind. Just like the bullet of a rifle, this battle leaves its wounds. I'm Spartacus Olson, and this is a World War II in real-time special on what we would call post.
Come on now. His name's Spartacus, for goodness sake. Yeah, and his stash is awesome.
Traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. PTSD is a mental and behavioral disorder that develops after exposure to traumatic events. And warfare is almost entirely composed of traumatic events. Witnessing death, coming close to losing one's own life, being a victim of or perpetrator of violence. All of these contribute. Despite commonly held tropes, PTSD, shell shock, war neurosis, all interrelated conditions, are not the result of cowardice. Soldiers cannot simply get a grip and overcome their symptoms. It is, in fact, a completely uncontrollable reaction to the stress of the battle and unseen injuries to the brain. The symptoms, as well as their intensity and persistence, are varied. These include disturbing thoughts, flashbacks, and dreams. The fight or flight response can also be affected.
Mrs. Metcalf, I was holding back from correcting that. Oh, man. It's all good. I mean, you spelled it like it sounds.
And causing a hypervigilant state. PTSD often brings with it depression and anxiety, and in some cases, self-harm and suicide. For as long as there has been war, there has been psychological trauma. Modern warfare takes things to a new level. More efficient methods of killing, the incessant barrage of artillery and the power of the machine gun, the scale of death and destruction on land and at sea. All this causes ever greater psychological pressure. The term war neurosis was coined during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. It came to prominence during the Great War. In 1914, all armies began reporting cases of otherwise unharmed soldiers suffering various mental and physical symptoms. This included loss of memory, deafness, muteness, tremors, inability to stand and walk, convulsions, and occasional loss of consciousness. The Germans called the men Kriegszitterer, or war shakers. The British called the phenomenon shell shock, and the French had an equivalent term, obusite. There were two schools of thought as to the cause. The first held that it was the result of hidden damage to the brain, caused by shelling, hence shell shock. This was near impossible to prove during the war, but research almost a century later on 21st century veterans still revealed the brain injuries caused by explosive blast waves and their role in causing shell shock-like symptoms and PTSD.
Just like I talked about earlier, right? These brain injuries, it's the same thing, but the actual physical makeup instead of the chemical makeup changes. But I know how it works in my brain, but instead of your chemical network rewiring, your physical and chemical makeup with brain injuries change, and it changes years of your hello Misty, years of your life in an instant, right? That instant, memories get lost. People's been known to, yes, Mr. Rican, thank you. It gets knocked all out of whack. You need a knockometer to fix it. I don't think anybody's found one yet. But, the insomnia, other psychological disorders, ADHD, people have been known to come back who were otherwise healthy with being on the spectrum. It's an endless list of things that it affects.
The other school held that it was psychological rather than physical. The French psychiatrist Emmanuel Régy noted in 1915 that of 88 cases he had observed, just 20%.
I'd like to be able to pronounce words like this dude.
Had physical wounds. He discovered that in all cases, fright, emotional shock, and seeing maimed comrades had been a major factor. Many years later, it will be shown that some people who experience dangerous and frightening situations continue to produce huge amounts of adrenaline long after the danger is over. This will later become accepted by scientists as a cause for PTSD. Wartime doctors may not know the exact causes, but they do attempt to treat its symptoms. By mid-1916, both the British and French had concluded that it was far better to treat soldiers suffering from mild shell shock near the front. Here, the men benefited from the maintenance of military discipline and routine. This became known as forward psychiatry. It wasn't entirely altruistic, though. Army administrations feared losing manpower. Men treated near the front were more likely to return to their units. This raises the question, who really benefited, the men or the...
Uh, but that has to come with a sweep your leg degree, doesn't it, Mr. Regan? Got a 400 level English degree. He was as annoying as he was. He was had some pretty sick comebacks. So yeah, Mrs. Metcalf, morbidity, ADHD, personality disorders, and autism. Thank you. I've heard some positive things about ketamine therapy for PTSD related depression and anxiety because it increases neuroplasticity. Yeah. There's I don't know if the VA is doing that. I mean, along with microdosing things. I don't know if the VA is gonna. That's why everybody talks about wanting to go on real ayahuasca trips. No pun intended, but it happened. It's an indestructible trifolds are indestructible. Okay, I'm glad that there's somebody that goes back in the lore. I'm sure all of you do, and can make me laugh. DP. I'm sure I have. I've seen just about everything he's done, but it is again a great take from Carlin and true in every sense. We need to add one more, and just psychiatric injury or psychiatric casualty is in the subspace. Oh me. All right. Let's see.
The Army. With the war over, there was an attempt to draw a curtain over war neurosis. Large section of Army and public opinion concluded that the men were cowards. A 1920 Royal Commission on Shell Shock took evidence from Lieutenant Colonel Gort, who had commanded troops at Passchendaele. Gort declared that breakdown in battle is a regrettable weakness. It does not happen in good units. When the committee reported in 1922, it recommended that the term shell shock be abolished altogether. Discipline needed to be strengthened, and men should not be given an easy escape from the battlefield. This is the view that is shared across Europe as the Second World War begins. In order to avoid supposedly bogus claims of war neurosis, the British Army announces in 1939 that sufferers will have to wait until after the war to be assessed for a pension. Forward psychiatry is forgotten. During the Battle of Dunkirk from May to June 1940, cases of what is now termed battle exhaustion are admitted to psychiatric wards in Dieppe, 100 miles from the front, before being evacuated back to the UK. Many of them are sent to the Maudsley Hospital in Sutton, just outside of London. The men who arrive from Dunkirk are victims of the German blitzkrieg and the failures of British and French policy, but their reception is one of harsh judgment. The staff at Sutton decide that the men's psychological problems result not from war, but from low intelligence, a weak family background, or unmanliness. These lost causes receive little.
Who did that sound like?
Other than generic occupational therapy, physical training, and therapeutic interviews before being cast out of the Army. In 2 years, just 26% of men at Sutton returned to some form of duty. Wehrmacht men suffer just like the British. Despite Hitler's delusions that his soldiers are Aryan supermen, they feel the pain of losing comrades, a breakdown and exhaustion after days of marching and fighting. As early as 1940.
So, to add to that, the Wehrmacht and I don't even want to try to say the double lightning bolt people would break down after shooting so many people that they had lined up from the prisons, and yeah, they would just go mad from it, just put down their weapons and walk away. And then when they became, oh, he's going to get into it though. Let me leave that alone.
40 doctors are recording psychosomatic, cardiac, and circulatory problems, stomach and intestinal ailments, and rheumatic symptoms. There's also a rise in suicides and self-mutilation. Army psychiatrists see the parallels with World War I and call the sufferers Kriegsneurotiker, or war neurotics. The problem becomes more widespread after Barbarossa runs out of steam during the winter of 1941-42, when fighting becomes a brutal trench war in the freezing cold against an increasingly capable enemy. Doctors on the Eastern...
There's nothing worse than being cold and fight. It keeps you it keeps you alert for sure.
Front begin diagnosing Schreckreaktionen, or acute fright reactions, with increasing frequency. Patients become frightened at the slightest sound, fear being alone, and have nightmares. In some cases, startled by their dreams, they leap from their beds and grab their weapons, ready to fight. By the end of the winter of 1941 to 1942, the number of German army suicides has exceeded the entirety of those recorded during World War I.
In 1 year.
In 1944, the Wehrmacht will forbid the diagnosis Kriegsneurose, or Kriegshysterie, in fear of facing an epidemic. And ignoring a problem's existence is, of course, a safe and tested way to make it go away. In any case, Wehrmacht soldiers suffering from PTSD are at immediate risk for their lives in other ways than suicide. If their symptoms persist, they will end up in psychiatric treatment centers and thus be at risk of being murdered in the Nazi euthanasia programs, a fate that will also meet German civilian men and women suffering from PTSD after the Allied bomb attacks, who are eventually murdered for reasons of being deemed disabled and a burden on society. Exactly how many of the several 100,000 victims of the Nazi euthanasia programs are PTSD sufferers is unclear, but the anecdotal data suggests...
Yeah, for sure. Wet socks would be the worst.
Yes, that it is at
lot of time at Fort Polk.
least in the thousands. PTSD makes no distinction between the victim or perpetrator of violence, something that leaves scars on the minds of the German death squads in the East. I'll turn here to the case of Reservepolizeibataillon 101, a paramilitary formation of the Ordnungspolizei, or ORPO, who commit several mass shootings of Jews in Poland. The first of these is at Josefov on July 13, 1942, and it claims 1,500 victims. As soon as the shooting begins, there are those who become overwhelmed. One of the men will recall during post-war interrogation that his nerves were totally finished after shooting his first victim. His sergeant grants him permission to leave the firing line. The weight of the men's actions truly sets in upon returning to barracks. They eat little, but they drink heavily in the days and weeks afterwards. One of the men recounts, comrades drank so much solely because of the many shootings of Jews, for such a life was quite intolerable sober. The commander, Major Trapp, advises his men not to talk about what they have done. But the memories resurface in nightmares. Some experience Schreckreaktionen. One night, a man awakes, seizes his rifle, and fires into the barracks ceiling. In difference to PTSD victims in the Wehrmacht, the death squads are at lower risk of mistreatment.
I want you to try to imagine being in a company-size unit and you just sit there and have a firing line and you're just offing people by not the hundreds, but by the thousands. It's truly unfathomable almost to have done that. And I've got a face off between a alligator and a cat right now. He's trying to herd her to where he wants her to go. It's rather entertaining. That's why I keep looking out and make sure nobody gets hurt.
Service is voluntary, and the SS and order police take care of their murderers. They can request transfer at any time in a terrifyingly callous twist of sympathy. While he has no qualms to order the murder even of infants, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler repeatedly emphasizes his admiration for his men's hard work and sympathy with these, the perpetrators, suffering. When they request to be relieved, it's usually to a position behind the front lines where they have better chances to recuperate. Now, the millions of survivors of crimes against humanity will, of course, suffer mental and physical consequences that go far beyond what we're seeing here. That I will cover in separate videos down the line, as it is a tragedy and health issue on a level to
Mr.
itself.
Reagan. To some extent, it's been a while.
In any case, as the war progresses, in Britain, there is some work on treatment of war neurosis. Wilfred Bion and John Rickman begin an experimental form of treatment at Northfield Hospital near Birmingham in autumn 1942. Up until now, treatment at Northfield has largely relied on sedatives. Bion and Rickman believed that patients must take responsibility for their own recovery. To do this, they give the men authority to organize their own affairs. They institute daily exercise and order the men to join at least one activity group. When some of the men ask to form a dancing group, Bion gives them permission to organize lessons themselves. The men must also attend a daily meeting. Gradually, the meetings become more businesslike. The morale of the men improves, and they develop what Bion calls an unmistakable esprit de corps. This is the beginning of group therapy, and it's combined with private discussions with psychiatrists.
This is where I get the fact that if Roadhog's still in here, talking about it became a form of therapy. Even if even if it's laughing at dumb people, it's still therapizing, a good form of therapy.
Of course, it's all geared towards getting men back into the army.
Yeah.
Bion hopes that the men will learn to put the needs of the group ahead of their own difficulty.
So it's not some altruistic endeavor, right? You got to keep fighting for worse together. I got you, Roadhog.
The army ends the experiment after 6 weeks, and Bion and Rickman are sent away. Conditions in the field are far different from the experiments at Northfield. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Palmer is area psychiatrist in Tripoli in 1943. In treating his patients, he employs psychotherapy and makes use of the drug ether. His goal is to induce a breakdown in which the patient realizes they're failing and abandoning their comrades and resolves to change. He gives an account of such a session. By means of question and answer, the patient is...
Can you imagine? And a lot of cults use this activity, right? Being left in doubt as to whether his present. Let's see. Oh man. Sorry, y'all. Many did, and many still do. Roadhog, but I understand his desire to do that. Okay, I'm close.
In treating his patients, he employs psychotherapy and makes use of the drug ether. His goal is to induce a breakdown in which the patient realizes they're failing and abandoning their comrades and resolves to change. He gives an account of such a session. By means of question and answer, the patient is left in some doubt as to whether his present absence from the front line is consistent with his duty as a soldier. He is told that he can be cured and warned that no terms can be made with his responsibility to his comrades. He is then subject to the ether technique. I invariably attempt to induce tears at this point. The patient is then given 48 hours to stew before being handed over to an NCO at the rehabilitation center. The NCO's job is to prevent backsliding, recultivate a soldierly bearing, discipline, self-respect, and pride. Palmer's
a lot of what we did when I was in troops units, so which was very seldom.
methods work on paper. They result in a reported 98% of his patients returning to some form of Army duty within 2 months. Of course, it's highly unlikely that the underlying issues have been addressed. By mid-1943, the Americans are encountering the same problems as the British. The Americans went into the war believing that psychiatric screening of recruits and conscripts would prevent future problems. This proves to be naive. At Guadalcanal, Marines are fighting the suicidal determination of the Imperial Japanese Army in the harsh conditions of the jungle itself. Conditions barely comprehensible to planners in Washington. As the battle draws to a close, scores of traumatized young Marines come home. In May 1943, Commander Edwin Smith, who leads a naval hospital in South California, describes 500 cases of something called Guadalcanal neurosis.
What
Men
I read
are reported to suffer
before.
headaches, sensitivity to sharp noises, amnesia, panic, and tremors. Commander Smith says this syndrome has never been seen before. If he'd asked his forefathers in the trenches of France, they could tell him exactly what the young men are suffering from. It won't be until the end of 1943 that the Americans will institute divisional psychiatrists. All this is storing up the massive problems for the future. The Americans will record 1 psychological casualty for every 4 wounded. By the end of the war, the British will have discharged around 109,000 men on psychiatric grounds, and the Wehrmacht will have 100,000 Kriegsneurotiker in their military hospitals. None of these figures include those who don't warrant hospitalization or discharge, or who have not been diagnosed yet. And it's not just the military. Civilians in Britain and Germany endured nightly bombing raids. In Germany, things are only getting worse as the tide of war turns. That means more death, more homes destroyed, more frightened nights huddled underground with worried neighbors and crying babies.
So, in the civilian population, I don't know what he's about to say, but in the civilian population, cases of psychiatric conditions actually dropped. It was because kind of like post 9/11, right? People came together and felt this sense of community and togetherness, things we have forgotten at this point to some extent.
Babies. The World War II generation will be permanently affected by their wartime trauma. 3 years after the war, 26% of German women will report that they still have dreams of the air raids. A study of Alsatian Wehrmacht veterans conducted in 1988 will show that 82% still experience intrusive memories and nightmares. Treatment options will improve by the end of the war, though. The experiments at Northfield Hospital will resume in 1944 and will form the basis for future treatment methods. The development of psychotropic drugs, such as antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication in the 1950s, will also provide some relief to sufferers. Yet, war neurosis, shell shock, and the trauma of war will continue to be poorly understood until the 1970s. Then researchers will begin studying the experiences of Holocaust survivors and will be confronted with tens of thousands of traumatized Vietnam veterans. It is only in 1980 that PTSD will be officially described and defined. And even then, the men and women who suffer will find themselves stigmatized. The crazed veteran will become a trope of post-Vietnam era Hollywood. Unsympathetic
Yep.
health systems and a lack of mental health support mean that into the 21st century, military veterans and civilians who have faced war will be at a far higher risk of depression, suicide, and self-harm. From ancient Greece to the trenches of no man's land, to the horrors of the Eastern Front, the Pacific, the bombed cities of World War II, and the inside of the terror industry, psychological horror goes hand in hand with war. When this conflict is over, cities will be rebuilt, wounds will be patched up, the world will want to move on to a brighter future. But the war will live on in all its horrid graphic details inside the minds of the hundreds of millions of human beings touched and changed forever by the ghastly, cold hands of deadly terror. We owe many of them an unrepayable debt of gratitude for turning their trauma into a force to forge a better world. The job they began is far from done, and it is their legacy that we must never forget.
Let me do this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. His channel's just called World War II. It is good history. I enjoy his stuff a good deal. He speaks much better than I do. You know, let's see. I am well, Todd's gonna be doing some looks like anti-Semitic stuff tonight, so he'll probably will be going on. I don't know. I don't know if there's any conflicting schedules out there, but I will keep you guys updated. I know this rehashed a lot of stuff, but I haven't done a whole lot on PTSD. I want to get back to more comfortable things and need a break from that very, very academic work of a history of God. I enjoy it a lot, but each chapter is going to take about 3 days. Yeah, Oshin, that's why I was saying he's going to be on a anti-Semitism rant, and he also has Ratchet graduation season up. Oh, no. I'm just talking about pronouncing words. Got to make sure he's not chewing on chords. So that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to try to break it up more and kind of get back to my roots, but I still want to honor the religious part of it too. I know not everybody's into it, but I enjoy it. So anyway, any questions? Okay, Misty. I mean, I don't know. The boss man, I'll have to see what the boss says. I will talk to you guys later. Sorry, Nomad, for not having your cool intros and outros. Juggling work in this is a delicate dance that ADHD man has yet to master, obviously. So you guys have a good afternoon. Eat something good for dinner, or if you're across the pond, breakfast, lunch, wherever you are. All right, see y'all.